My brother stole $412,000 from me. While I was on a classified mission I'm still not allowed to name. He used our father's funeral to do it, and for 3 years, I let him believe it had worked. The sound that ended all of it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a crash, wasn't a shout, wasn't the kind of noise you brace for. It was a champagne glass tilting against a tablecloth. 200 conversations going quiet at exactly the same moment. The way rooms go quiet when something has shifted underneath them, and nobody has been told yet what it is. Every head turned, and my brother, the man who spent 3 years telling this community that I was the family's quiet disappointment, the sister who chose a uniform over a real life, who showed up every few years with no husband, no children, no visible proof of worth, and expected everyone to pretend that was enough, suddenly forgot how to breathe. His name was Garrett Sinclair. Mine was Lieutenant Colonel Mara Sinclair, Callsign Wraith, Fort Meade, Maryland. He knew the first one. He had no idea about the second. And neither did the 200 people sitting in that ballroom, who had been nodding along to his version of our family story for 3 years. Before I tell you how we got there, drop a comment right now. What time is it where you are, and what city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. I'll read every single one. This is how we got there. I drove to Columbus from Maryland that morning. 5 hours and 40 minutes. One stop outside Zanesville for gas, and a cup of coffee from a machine that tasted like ambition and cardboard. I drank all of it. I have never been selective about tools that still work. The gala started at 6. I arrived at 5:58, parked 2 blocks from the hotel because the valet line was backed up, and I have never been able to stand in a line someone else is managing badly. I left my coat at check, found the ballroom, and ordered a club soda from the bar along the north wall. I was wearing a navy dress I had bought for a retirement ceremony in 2021. I had no date. I had no agenda, officially. My name is Mara Sinclair. I am 39 years old. I wear my hair short because it is practical, and I have never been precious about things that don't earn preciousness. I drive a 2016 Honda Civic with a dent above the rear passenger wheel, that I have not repaired, because the car still runs, and a thing that still runs does not need to be fixed. I own 1 good blazer, 2 pairs of dress shoes, and my father's watch. A 1978 Seiko he bought with the first paycheck he ever deposited from the landscaping company, back when the company was 1 truck and a borrowed trailer. The crystal is scratched. The band has been replaced twice. It keeps time within 30 seconds a week, which my father said was close enough for a thing that had already outlived most of what had been built. Around it, Garrett didn't know it existed, which meant he couldn't touch it. None of that would have told you what I was. That was the point. My brother Garrett and his wife Vanessa were already there, which did not surprise me. Garrett was the kind of man who arrived early to rooms where he expected to become the point of them. He was 42, 6'2", built for photographs and firm handshakes, wearing a charcoal suit with a small American flag pin on the lapel. His teeth had been whitened since I'd last seen him. He was laughing at something a man in a navy blazer had said, his hand on the man's shoulder, filling the corner of the room with his presence, the way a fire in a showroom fills a corner, warm to look at, not quite warm enough to trust. Vanessa spotted me before Garrett did. She always spotted me first. That precision of hers was commonly mistaken for social grace. It was actually its own form of surveillance. She was 40, slim, wearing a dove gray dress that cost more than my monthly car payment, with the kind of expression that never moved much, regardless of what was happening underneath. She touched Garrett's forearm and said something I couldn't hear. He turned, Mara. He opened his arms. The smile was genuine, I think. That was always the complication with Garrett. His warmth was real. It just had operating conditions. I walked over. He hugged me. The kind of hug that says something about appearances and nothing about content. Vanessa kissed the air near my cheek and said I looked rested, which in her vocabulary meant unremarkable, which in mine meant good. For the next hour, I moved through the cocktail reception in Garrett's orbit. He introduced me 4 times. 4 different people, a city councilman, a hospital foundation chair, 2 of his business partners from the Sinclair Development Group. Each introduction was the same. This is my sister Mara. She's been in the Army forever. Not lieutenant colonel, not military intelligence, not 14 years, 6 deployments, Fort Meade, Maryland. Not a call sign, give it her inside a classified operation she is not permitted to name at dinner parties. Just, she's been in the Army forever. I let them believe it. That sentence had been with me for years. It was not a surrender, it was a posture. I had been trained, specifically and repeatedly, to occupy rooms without being read, to exist at a level of presence that allowed observation without exposure. In my profession, we called it minimal signature. In my family, I had discovered long ago, it came naturally. I had been the quiet Sinclair since approximately 1994. I found my spot at the back bar, ordered another club soda, and watched the room. Garrett moved through it like a boat through still water, parting things, leaving a wake. Vanessa moved through it like a current, slower, less visible, and ultimately more powerful. I noted the difference. I noted it carefully. There are things about me that matter to what happened later. I am a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, Branch Military Intelligence, assigned to Fort Meade, Maryland. My specialty is counterintelligence, specifically financial networks used to fund or conceal illegal activity. I am patient, I am methodical, I am genuinely comfortable with silencers, in a way that has made me a poor candidate for small talk, and an excellent candidate for the work I actually do. My call sign is Wraith. It was assigned in the winter of 2019, after an 11-week operation in which I was embedded inside a financial network operating through shell companies, connected to construction contracts across 3 states. The network had been moving money for domestic extremist organizations, laundering it through legitimate-looking businesses, for 4 years before we found the thread. My role was to map the internal architecture completely, without disturbing it enough for anyone inside to notice I was there. By the time we moved, I had identified every node, every transfer point, every person whose name needed to be on a warrant, the cell leaders told investigators afterward, individually and without coordinating, that they had detected no surveillance whatsoever. One of them said, to his attorney, and I read this in the debrief summary later, it was like being watched by something that wasn't there. The operation was called Hollow Reed. The commanding general who approved the commendation package was Brigadier General Thomas Crawford, now retired, 41 years of service. Silver Star. The kind of man who had spent his career understanding with precision what quiet people were capable of. He lived in Virginia. His daughter lived in Columbus, Ohio. He was standing at the silent auction tables when I saw him, 2 hours into the evening, talking to a woman in a burgundy blazer. He was older than I remembered, his hair fully white now, his walk slower. But he stood the way old generals stand, like the ground was a subordinate that knew better than to shift. I did not approach him. I did not signal anything. I ordered my 3rd club soda and stood where I was, and processed the fact of his presence the way I processed most unexpected developments. Slowly, completely, and without moving anything on my face. Outside, through the tall windows along the ballroom's south wall, rain had begun to fall against the Columbus skyline, thin and steady, and entirely indifferent to everyone's plans. My father died in January, 3 years before that night. Robert Sinclair, 68 years old. Prostate cancer, diagnosed 14 months before he died, and still a surprise when it arrived. The way certain things are, even after all the warning. He had spent 30 years running a landscaping company in Westerville, Ohio, built from a pickup truck and a commercial mower. And the particular stubbornness of a man who measured himself by what he constructed, and not by what he was paid for constructing it. He died in the house he'd bought in 1991, in his own bed, surrounded by furniture he had refused to replace on the grounds that a thing which still worked did not need to be fixed. His attorney, Paul Greenberg, had the estate documents in proper order. My father left everything to Garrett and me in equal shares. My half of the estate came to $412,000, not a fortune, enough, 9 days after the funeral. I was in the final operational phase of a classified assignment I cannot name here, in a location I cannot specify here. I had limited communication access and a 48-hour window to complete a task that had taken 4 months to build toward. I had not slept more than 5 hours in any 24-hour period for 2 weeks running. Grief does not pause for operational timelines. I had learned this before and would learn it again. The email came to a family account I checked twice a week. Subject line: urgent, estate matter, dad's business, 2 paragraphs. I read it as Garrett, because the account was his and because I was tired. And because grief makes you lean toward the familiar, even when the familiar has not always deserved it. The body said, the landscaping business carried significant concealed debt that had not appeared in the preliminary estate review. Without immediate action, the estate would enter probate litigation that could tie up both of our shares for years. Garrett had located a buyer who would settle everything cleanly. But both signatures were required within 48 hours because the buyer was leaving the country. An electronic signature form was attached. I want you to understand the number I am about to give you, because numbers are the only honest way to describe certain kinds of damage. 3 years. That is how long it took me to understand the full shape of what happened in those 48 hours. 12 emails I sent to Garrett in the 9 months following the settlement, asking for documentation, for the debt records I had never seen, for a copy of the final accounting. One response, from a lawyer named Dale Marsh, who had replaced Paul Greenberg as estate attorney without anyone informing Paul, which said the matter was settled and reflected the mutual agreement of all parties, and further correspondence should be directed to his office. $412,000. Gone in 48 hours. I need you to sit with that number for a moment, the way I had to, not because of what it bought or didn't buy, because of what it represented. 30 years of my father waking up before dawn in a house that still had the original kitchen tile. 30 years of him driving a truck that needed the passenger window cranked by hand because the electric mechanism had broken in 2009 and he saw no reason to fix a thing that could be fixed manually. 30 years of careful, quiet accumulation by a man who never once in my memory talked about money, except to say that you spent it on things that lasted and saved the rest. That number was him. That was what he had left for me specifically by name. In a document he had signed in Paul Greenberg's office with the care of a man who wanted to make sure it landed correctly. Gone in 48 hours, while I was in a room I cannot name, doing work I cannot describe, trusting the wrong person. The landscaping business had no debt. I know this because Paul Greenberg told me the following spring, his voice going very still on the phone as I described the email and the timeline and the signature. The business was profitable. It sold 8 months after my signature for $920,000. Garrett received the full proceeds. Vanessa's consulting firm billed the transaction for services rendered. Dale Marsh collected his fee. When I hung up with Paul, I sat at my kitchen table in Maryland for 20 minutes with both hands flat on the surface, doing nothing. The refrigerator ran. A car passed on the street outside. I breathed in for 4 counts and out for 6, somewhere down the block. A neighbor was mowing their lawn in November, the way people in Maryland sometimes do, as if the cold hadn't fully announced itself yet. Then I called Paul back and asked him what we could do. Before I tell you what Paul and I built over the next 3 years, pause right here. Drop a comment. What time is it where you are, and what city are you in? I want to know how far this story travels. I'll be reading every single one. Before dinner was served, I stepped out onto the small balcony off the east corridor. I needed 60 seconds away from the noise. My knee ached. It always ached in cold, wet weather, a shard of bone and muscle memory from a training exercise at Hohenfels, Germany, where I came down wrong off a wall obstacle in the dark and shattered the patella. The orthopedic surgeon at Walter Reed said I could run 3 miles on flat ground if I maintained the PT schedule. I ran 3 miles every morning at 5:30, not to prove anything, because holding a standard you've set for yourself is one of the few things in life that belongs entirely to you. The rain had moved in fully by then, steady and thorough, the kind of October rain that doesn't apologize. Someone had left a half-empty coffee cup on the railing, and the rain was filling it from the top, changing it from the inside out. I watched that for a moment, patient, uninterested in being watched. I found that useful. I stood on the balcony and let the cold come through my dress, and I thought about Paul Greenberg in his kitchen in Worthington. 7 months before, with a binder open on his table between us, he had not told me everything he knew. He was still confirming some of it. He told me enough. Without thinking about it, I turned my father's watch over in my left hand. The scratched crystal caught the ambient light from the windows behind me. The second hand moved the same way it always had, steady, unhurried, indifferent to what had happened to the money my father had set aside, to the name that had been used without permission, to the 48 hours that had cost 3 years. The watch didn't know any of that. It just kept going. I found that useful. Whitmore Holdings, LLC. Incorporated in Ohio in 2019. 2 affiliated companies. Construction contracts in Central Ohio and 2 adjacent states. Garrett's name in the corporate filings as a co-investor in 1 affiliate. Vanessa's consulting firm, billing Whitmore for services in 2020 and 2021, $87,000. For services that resisted precise definition upon examination. The kind of billing that looks fine until someone asks a direct question and then looks like something else entirely. Paul did not know about Hollow Reed. He did not know that the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had contacted Fort Meade the previous spring to consult on our forensic methodology for tracing shell company networks. He did not know that one of the junior analysts who had worked under me on the operation now sat in the FBI's Columbus field office and had been sitting there for 7 months, working a case whose edges I recognized. I let him believe I was only a daughter who had been wronged. Some things you don't explain. You hold them correctly, and you wait for the room to catch up. The coffee cup on the railing was full of rain now, indistinguishable from the thing it had been before. I stood there another moment. The rain came down. The city went about its business. Then I straightened my dress, rolled my shoulders back once, and went inside. Dinner was a round table of 10. I was seated between the bank president's wife, whose name was Catherine, and who collected antique postcards with the specific devotion of a person who has found the exact right object for their particular kind of love, and a retired judge whose name I didn't catch, but who had excellent posture and said almost nothing the entire evening, which I respected entirely. Garrett and Vanessa sat directly across the table. I considered the seating arrangement for approximately 3 seconds and concluded it was intentional. Vanessa had the kind of attention to logistics that most people reserved for things they considered important. And Vanessa considered most things important if they could be managed in her favor. The butternut squash bisque was good. The salmon was overcooked. I ate both without comment. Vanessa began her story during the salad course. She directed it toward Clifford, the bank president, and his wife, but she held the whole table without appearing to try. It was a particular kind of skill. The kind that takes years to develop in households where attention was the only currency that moved freely. She had a way of making you feel like you were receiving information you were specially trusted with, even when the information was designed to do damage. When Robert died, she said, using my father's name with the fluency of a woman who had decided grief was transferable, Garrett and I handled everything: the estate, the business arrangements, the service. Mara was overseas at the time. She let that breathe. The pause did the work she needed it to do. We were grateful she could fly in for the funeral, of course. But afterward, everything fell to us, as it tends to when someone has been gone long enough. Clifford made a sound of sympathetic understanding. 14 years of service. Vanessa continued. We are proud of her for that, obviously, but you cannot be present for a family from overseas. You make a choice when you serve that long, and the people at home absorb the cost of that choice. We've absorbed it without complaint. She smiled the smile of a woman delivering content wrapped in the performance of reluctance. It was, I thought, a very good performance. It always had been. I set my fork down. I moved my hands to my lap. I pressed my right thumb into the scar tissue at the base of my left palm, and old habit, small pressure to keep the larger reaction from showing, and I breathed for 4 counts in and 6 counts out, and I watched. Garrett was nodding at something Clifford said, wearing the expression of a man managing a painful situation with grace and discretion. I had seen that expression in photographs Paul had sent me. Garrett at the groundbreaking for a Whitmore Holdings project, one hand in his jacket pocket, smiling into the construction dust, that easy, performed humility, that practiced weight of burden. He had spent so long performing the role of the responsible sibling that I think he had stopped being able to separate the performance from the belief. 2 seats to my left, Catherine had set down her fork entirely and turned slightly toward me with the look of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of conversation. She'd been telling me about a 1943 linen postcard from Galveston she'd tracked down at a New Jersey estate. Sail a beach boardwalk in faded pastels, colors still almost perfect after 80 years. She had driven 4 hours for that sail on a Tuesday morning, which told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person she was. I could not believe something that old is still this vivid, she said, genuinely delighted, a little amazed at the world for cooperating. After everything it's been through. I looked at her, then back at Garrett and Vanessa across the table. Some things hold longer than you expect, I said. She set her fork down and beamed at me like I'd handed her something she'd been looking for. Exactly, that's exactly it. It was near the coat check, around 8 in the evening, that I learned something that changed the shape of the night. 2 women from the foundation board were talking 4 feet away from me, in the normal volume of people who believe they are not being listened to. Brigadier General Crawford had asked, late that afternoon, to add a brief acknowledgement to the awards segment. The executive director had approved it. The women weren't sure what it was about. I stood at the coat hook approximately 4 seconds longer than retrieving lip balm required. Then I went to the ladies' room. I ran cold water over the inside of both wrists for 30 seconds. I looked at myself in the mirror, the way you look at a thing you need to be honest with. I dried my hands on a paper towel and went back to the ballroom. I had not planned any of what came next. I want to be clear about that. I had come to Columbus for a fundraiser and to put my face in a room where, if anything was going to surface from the Paul Greenberg situation, it was better to be present than absent. I had not known Crawford would be there. I had not engineered his recognition of me. I had simply, for 14 years, existed correctly. And there are rooms where that is enough. The awards program began at 8:45. Sandra Holt spoke well, the particular fluency of someone who cared enough about the work that the words didn't need to be polished. She talked about the families the foundation served. Children of deployed parents, still making lunches, packing backpacks. Covering for an absence they'd been told was important. Surviving spouses navigating benefits paperwork alone at kitchen tables at midnight. Veterans who had come home to find the bureaucracy they'd served had not saved a chair for them. Then she introduced the donation recognition segment. Garrett took the podium at 8:55. He adjusted the microphone with the ease of long practice. He smiled at Sandra Holt, thanked the board, nodded to specific people in the front rows the way men nod, to people they want others to see them nodding to. Service means something in this family, he said. My family has always believed in putting your name on things, building something you can stand behind in the community where you live, where you raise your children, where you want to leave something behind. He paused. His eyes moved across the room. They passed over my table without stopping. There are people who take from the places that made them, and there are people who invest, who stay, who build. Tonight is about the people who stayed and built. We are proud to be among them. He said it the way people say things that have never been questioned to their face. He was still at the microphone when Brigadier General Thomas Crawford stood up. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. He pushed back his chair at the table 2 rows to my left, and he stood. And the way he stood, the specific quality of stillness in it, the command that does not require volume to be felt, produced a silence around him that moved outward across the room like something dropped into still water. Sandra Holt looked over from the side of the stage. Crawford raised one hand, palm forward, one gesture, small, precise. In certain rooms that gesture means, wait. The room waited. Garrett paused. He looked toward Crawford with the expression of a man recalibrating. He stepped back from the microphone. Crawford moved to the podium. His walk was slower than I remembered. His hip, I thought, from the way he compensated slightly on the left side, but his posture was exact. He thanked Garrett with a brief nod. He took the microphone and looked at the room for a long moment, methodical, left to right, the way a search pattern works, until his eyes reached my table. He stopped. I put both hands flat on the tablecloth. I breathed. Before we continue, Crawford said, I want to acknowledge someone in this room. The ballroom was completely quiet. Lieutenant Colonel Mara Sinclair, Callsign, Fort Meade, Maryland. The room did not yet understand those words. Most rooms don't. But some people in that room understood rank, and all of them understood that when a man with that bearing says words with that precision, the words are not decorative. Crawford continued. In 2021, Lieutenant Colonel Sinclair led a counterintelligence operation that mapped and dismantled a 3-state financial network operating through shell corporations, used to fund and conceal illegal activity at a scale this community has not seen. 11 individuals were arrested and subsequently prosecuted. The forensic methodology she developed during that operation has since been adopted by 2 federal agencies for use in ongoing investigations. He paused. 3 full seconds. I was the commanding general on that operation. I signed the commendation myself. She served at a level that most people in this room could not conceive of, and that she could not and did not tell anyone about. He looked at me one more time. I didn't know she was in this room until 40 minutes ago. I want this community to know who is in this room. He set the microphone down. Into the silence that followed, I said 2 words, Thank you, General. That was all. That was everything. If you're still here, if that just landed the way it landed in that room, hit the like button right now. Not for me. For every person who has spent years being the quiet one, while others decided they already knew who you were. The glass tipped. The linen received it. The pale gold liquid spread wide and quiet across the white tablecloth, and the only sound in the room was the ceiling fan overhead, turning through the air the same slow way it had been turning all evening, knowing nothing, owing nothing. Garrett looked at me across the table, for the first time since our father died. He looked at me like he was trying to actually see me, rather than confirming the version of me he had already decided on. I looked back at him without expression. There was nothing to explain. There was nothing to conceal. The room had done the explaining, and there was no version of what Crawford had just said that Garrett could restructure into something more comfortable. Vanessa's hand was still on his arm. Her face had not changed. It almost never changed, which was one of the things she had always been proud of. But her other hand, the one resting in her lap beneath the tablecloth, was turning her cocktail ring slowly around her finger, around and around. A small private motion she probably didn't know she was making. I noticed. I always noticed. That was what 14 years had done to my attention. Some people only move when they believe no one is watching. What came after took time. Real things usually do. Crawford found me at coat check before he left. He shook my hand with both of his, an old-fashioned gesture, the kind that communicates what words in a crowded room cannot afford to. He said he hadn't known about my family situation. I said I knew, sir. He said he was sorry. I said, don't be. He nodded once, and that was enough, and he left 6 weeks after the gala. The Ohio Bar Association's Ethics Committee received a formal complaint regarding Dale Marsh's conduct in the administration of the Robert Sinclair estate. The complaint was detailed. Paul Greenberg had spent 2 years being thorough, and Paul Greenberg was a man who understood that thoroughness was its own form of patience. 11 weeks after the gala, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Columbus executed a search warrant on Whitmore Holdings LLC and its 2 affiliated companies. Garrett's name appeared in the corporate filings as a co-investor in one of the affiliates. Vanessa's consulting firm had billed Whitmore Holdings $87,000 across 2 fiscal years for services that, upon examination, resisted precise definition. The records were complete. They were always complete. People who believe they are invisible always document everything, because documentation is how you prove to yourself that the transaction was legitimate and you earned what you received. Over the following 8 months, the Sinclair Development Group lost 3 city contracts. The combined value was $2.3 million. The councilman who had been at the gala, the one Garrett had been laughing with during cocktail hour, hand on his shoulder, taking up space, stopped returning Garrett's calls. The local business magazine that had listed Garrett among its top 40 under 50 for 3 consecutive years did not list him in the following edition. The billboard on Route 33 that said Sinclair Development Group, Building Central, Ohio's future came down in April and was replaced by an advertisement for a family law attorney. Vanessa stepped down from the boards of 2 local nonprofit organizations in February. The organizations updated their websites without announcement. That is the particular quality of certain kinds of falls. They are registered by subtraction, by the thing that is no longer there. The civil case Paul Greenberg had been building settled 14 months after the gala. The settlement amount was $380,000, not $412. Paul said it was as close as civil law could get to write, and that close was the honest word, and I should take it. I deposited the check on a Wednesday afternoon in October. I drove home. I ate a sandwich at my kitchen table. I went back to work. Garrett called 7 months after the gala. I answered. The conversation was brief and carefully worded, the cadence of a man who had rehearsed it. Probably more than once. Probably with an attorney somewhere in the room. He hoped we could put this behind us. He hoped I understood that families went through complicated periods, and people made decisions under pressure. He used the word complicated 4 times in approximately 5 minutes, which is what people say when they mean. I did a thing that I need to be a category of circumstance, rather than a choice I made. I told him I wasn't ready to put it behind us. I told him that when I would say so, and that in the meantime I hoped he was taking care of himself. There was a silence on the line after that, the kind that opens up when a person expected a different response and doesn't have a prepared one for the response they got. I heard him breathe. Then, quietly, he said something I hadn't expected. I think I needed you to have less, so I could feel like I'd built something myself. He didn't say it as an apology. He said it the way people say true things when they finally run out of room to avoid them, flatly, without ceremony, the way you acknowledge a structural problem you've been working around for years and have finally decided to name. I didn't answer immediately. I held the phone and listened to the connection between us. Thin, long distance, real. That was the closest he ever came to the truth. And I will say this, it was more than I had expected from him. It was not enough to undo what had been done, but it was a sentence that had cost him something. And I knew what it cost because I had watched him perform his confidence for years. And I knew what that performance was covering. I said, I know. Then I said goodnight. I'm not certain he understood the full distance still between us. Understanding requires a degree of stillness that Garrett had never found comfortable, but that was his work to do, not mine. And I had enough of my own. Vanessa has not contacted me. I don't expect her to. People who architect these things don't make the calls themselves. They write letters through intermediaries in language designed to distribute fault so evenly across a surface that nobody is accountable for any specific square inch of it. I have received 2 such letters. I have read them carefully, filed them in the correct folder, and spent no further time on them. I retired from active duty 16 months after the gala. The ceremony was at Fort Meade on a gray Thursday morning, cold enough that people's breath showed. There were perhaps 40 people in attendance, which is exactly the right number for that kind of ceremony. The people who knew what the work actually was, not the people who knew what to call it. Crawford sent a letter, 2 paragraphs, every word selected and nothing filler. I have kept it in the top drawer of my desk, under a paperweight shaped like a river stone that I picked up from the shore of the Chesapeake Bay. On a morning, I needed to remember what still things felt like. I live now in a small house outside Frederick, Maryland. The mornings are quiet, in the way that belongs to people who have stopped filling silence with noise, just because silence was available. I consult occasionally on work I cannot describe at dinner parties. When people ask what I do, I tell them I used to be in the army. They nod. They move on. I let them believe it. I understand now that I was doing 2 different things when I said that to myself over the years. The first was operational. Keep your profile low. Let the room underestimate you. Stay useful in the background. The second was something I didn't identify until much later. It was a form of grief. The grief of a woman who had given the most significant years of her life to work she could never explain, in rooms she could never describe, in service of people who would never know her name, and who came home to a family that had decided in her absence that absence was the same as having nothing. It isn't. It was never nothing. It just wasn't visible to people who had decided not to look. There is a thing I've been thinking about lately. Sitting on the back step of my house in the evenings with coffee I let go cold, watching the oak tree at the edge of the yard drop its leaves in the specific order I've come to know. I've been thinking about what it costs a person to spend years being underestimated by the people who were supposed to know them best. Not the financial cost, the other kind, the slow erosion of believing your own account of yourself, when everyone around you is offering a different version, a simpler version, a version that fits neatly into the story they needed to tell. I spent more years than I should have wondering whether they were right, whether the quiet life was actually emptiness, whether the absence of proof they could see meant the absence of something real. It didn't, but that particular doubt is hard to hold correctly when you're tired. And I was tired often. My father had a saying he applied to engines and to people with equal conviction. He said it holding up a length of metal tubing in his garage. Examining it in the overhead light, a hollow reed looks like nothing, looks like weakness, looks like something you could step on without noticing. But it's the only thing that can carry a note across the entire length of a room. I was probably 12 the first time I heard it. I thought he was talking about a tube. I spent 16 years, and 6 deployments, and 1 shattered kneecap, and 1 Christmas table where I chose not to speak, and 1 champagne glass spreading slowly across white linen, learning what he was actually talking about. The settlement check was deposited on a Wednesday. $380,000, as close to right as the law allowed. I sat with it in Paul Greenberg's office for a long time before I signed anything. Paul had a box of tissues on his desk that I didn't need, and coffee that I did. My father built that money the way he built everything, quietly, before most people were awake, without asking for recognition or thanks or a name on a building. He saved it for me, specifically because he understood something. In the way parents sometimes understand things they never say out loud. That the child who disappears in service of other people doesn't always come home to what she left behind. He wanted to make sure I did. I didn't keep all of it for myself. Most of it went into a fund for the spouses of deployed service members facing housing instability in the Frederick County area, people navigating foreclosure notices and lease disputes and bureaucratic mazes, while their families were somewhere they couldn't call easily. I knew those mazes. I had watched people I worked beside lose their footing in them, while they were too far away to do anything about it. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was just the most accurate thing I could think of to do, with something that had always belonged to people like us. I think my father would have approved. He was a practical man. He believed money should go toward things that lasted. He believed a thing that still worked didn't need to be replaced. It just needed to be pointed in the right direction. I keep his watch on my wrist every day now, not as a reminder of what was taken, as a reminder of what held. The second hand moves the same way it always has, steady, unhurried, keeping time within 30 seconds a week, which is close enough. They thought I was the hollow thing in the equation, the absence, the uniform in place of a person, the signature on a document that could be moved around without consequence. They built their version of our family story on that assumption. They put their full weight on it. They told it so many times, they stopped checking whether it was true, and I let them. I let them carry it all the way to the end. He knew the first name. He had no idea about the second. The reed just had to find the right breath. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs this reminder today. And tell me in the comments. Has someone in your life ever underestimated you the way my family underestimated me? What did you do about it? Or what do you wish you'd done? I'll be reading every single response.